Hello everybody, this is TipTop MTG, and in today's video we are going to be taking a look at Magic's next set, Innistrad Crimson Vow, and take a look at the mechanics of the set. So for those of you who don't know, today being October 28th, Magic the Gathering has revealed a ton of details about the upcoming set, and you can expect some coverage of that on my channel, but today we're going to be talking about all of the mechanics that they revealed, starting with training. So I'm not going to read through what they have to say, I'm just going to explain the mechanics to you. So training is a mechanic that will mostly appear on green and white cards representing the humans, and essentially what it does on text, it says, whenever this creature attacks with another creature with greater power, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So for instance, Apprentice Sharpshooter here, if it attacks with a 2/2, so if you declare this and a 2/2 as an attacker, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Apprentice Sharpshooter. And so it is very, very similar to the mentor mechanic of Boros, but it's actually better in a lot of different ways. So mentor, if we look at the official wording of that, it goes along the lines of, when a creature with mentor attacks, you may put a +1/+1 counter on an attacking creature with lesser power. So this is kind of the inverse. So mentor normally goes on the bigger creature, which makes a creature smaller, and then training goes on the smaller creature and gets bigger. So both have their advantages. For instance, a 4/4 with mentor, though, if you're able to keep making creatures, you're able to keep pumping out counters. But the advantage with training is that you could boost this thing up 4 or 5 times all at once. And so it's kind of this advantage of, do you want lots of creatures or big creatures? And training really, really helps with that. And so you'll notice that is in green and white, which already cares about +1/+1 counter. So I think it is an interesting mechanic because, yes, you can just have one card with training in your deck, and if your deck is a +1/+1 counter deck, it's going to synergize really, really well. Versus with mentor, yeah, you could boost up your big creature and then swing with it and put it on a small one. This one I feel like works a little bit more intuitively, where the creatures actually get boosted up. And so I definitely like it. I do see the advantages of mentor being able to distribute the counters a little bit more. And obviously the creature does need to attack. In both situations, the smaller creature has to attack, which means it has to be safe to attack, which does mean there's just some inherent issues with it. I don't think there'll be a training deck, but I do think +1/+1 counter decks may like some of the rares that use this mechanic. Commons, this is nice in draft if you have a +1/+1 counter theme, but outside of that, I don't see it being super duper crazy. This next mechanic, though, is kind of crazy, and it's called Cleave. It's found on instants and sorceries, and let's read this card without reading the Cleave thing first. Search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. But if you pay its Cleave cost, you ignore anything with the brackets. So then it turns into search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So for 1 mana, you can get a basic land into your hand. So essentially, if you really need that land, this can kind of be any color. It can be your color fixing for 1 mana. And then if you are later in the game and you don't need lands, you pay 4 mana and it becomes Demonic Tutor for a little bit more. And so it's a very, very interesting mechanic. I'm excited to see what other types of cards it's on, but I think that this is super versatile. Now, this is just another form of kicker. This card could say search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. If the spell's kicker cost was paid, instead do X, Y, and Z. But note, Cleave is the alternate cost. It is not on top of it. So to cast this, it is 1 black, black, green, or green. It is not 1 black, black, green, green. So when you cleave something, you just pay that cost. You don't pay this plus this. And I think it's a really, really interesting mechanic that actually feels almost custom Magic the Gathering cardy, where you're, ignoring parts of cards. But I think we're going to get some really, really interesting stuff. All right, next we have blood tokens, which isn't necessarily a mechanic, but it is a new artifact type. This was hinted at by Mark Rosewater, and I actually predicted it, not in a video, but just I thought about it. Blood. So it's an artifact, and you can pay 1 and tap to discard a card, sacrifice this artifact to draw a card. So essentially, it's a clue, but instead of paying 2 mana and sacking the artifact, this one you pay 1 mana and discard a card. So clues let you pay mana to draw a card. This lets you pay mana to rummage. And so that's you're discarding a card to then draw a card. And so that is pretty cool. But what makes it more interesting is that there are cards that are going to care about it. So let's talk about Gluttonous Guest. So it says, whenever it enters the battlefield, create a blood token. Then, whenever you sacrifice a blood token, you gain a life. Some things are going to care about when you sacrifice it. They revealed a card that's not in this article on the announcement stream that basically, once you have 5 blood tokens, you can transform it. So there are going to be cards that care about it. Again, I see that being more limited-y and maybe just fun, like Innistrad stuff, but I do think that it's more interesting than just, oh, it's like a clue. The fact that there are lots of cards that care about it. Then we have Daybound and Nightbound. I'm not going to talk too much about these because they were in Midnight Hunt. You can check out my mechanics video about that if you're interested. But essentially, day and night are returning for this set, and werewolves are as well. So for instance, during day, this thing's a 2/6 with Defender, and then if a player casts no spells on their turn, the next turn it becomes night, and all of your stuff turns to its night side, and then things with Daybound, Nightbound enter on their Nightbound side. That's just kind of the rough interpretation of it. There is a lot more nuance about when these things can and can't transform and all of that. And then if someone casts 2 spells on their turn, it turns back to day the next turn and it goes back to Wary Prisoner. But that is returning. Another returning mechanic is Disturb, which essentially says you may pay the mana cost and return it from your graveyard transformed. So essentially you can play your cards twice. In the other set, they were all creature to creature. This time they are creature to creature, but also creature to enchantment. And so it's kind of interesting. I do think they can be a little bit more aggressively costed because I think having a creature and then being able to basically play it again is very, very powerful. And so they had to make the Disturb cost pretty high. Another advantage here is that they get to start as spirits and then turn into like enchantments rather than starting as humans, which were not synergizing with the spirit tribe and turning into other more useful things. So I think that this is actually a better version of the mechanic, and I'll be excited to see what they can do with that, because I'm assuming maybe it'll be more than just enchantment auras, maybe just normal enchantments, maybe even artifact enchantments even. We'll have to see. And then a returning mechanic, but not from Innistrad Midnight Hunt, is Exploit, which essentially says when this thing enters the battlefield, you can sack a creature, and then the card will do something. So for instance, this one says, whenever this thing exploits a creature, each opponent sacrifices a creature. So, it enters the battlefield, you can sacrifice one of your 1/1s to make each opponent sacrifice something. What's interesting is it does say whenever this creature enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature, which does mean it can kill itself. So you could play this as 5 mana, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Not necessarily efficient, but some of the cards it does make a little bit more sense. For instance, there's one that's 2 blue, whenever it exploits something, counter target spell. And it's a 4-drop with flash, so you could pay 4, flash it in, sacrifice it, and now you kind of have a counter spell. But yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Cards care about exploit. I would not be surprised if we see cards that are like whenever you exploit a creature, not just whenever this specific card exploits. But yeah, that is it. It is a little bit less than Midnight Hunt. Midnight Hunt had, I think, more with Investigate in there. This has the blood tokens, I believe, in place of that. But we do still have Transform, Disturb, Exploit, Daybound, Nightbound, Cleave, and Training. And so we still have a lot more than a normal Magic set, but I do think that does lead to some more interesting things. I wonder if Training is going to appear a lot on a lot of cards just because it wasn't a huge thing they talked about during the event. And so I wonder if it's just one of the things where it wasn't really a keyword, and now it is, just to make it a little bit easier. We'll have to see. Sometimes they have things that are mechanics of the set that aren't keyworded. So like there might be a common set of text that's on a lot of cards but just doesn't have a keyword. Maybe that's the case here, but we will have to see. Either way, guys, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below. I just thought I'd give you a brief overview of what they revealed today in terms of mechanics. Stay tuned for more details about Crimson Vow, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.